Hey all, it's Breach from Chthonia podcast, and welcome to another Monday live stream. And I am, it's been an incredibly interesting week this week, because I have been really busy. I've been burning the midnight oil. I've been doing a lot of work, and it just seems like it's just one of those things that's kind of come up all at once. So I'm going to start by giving a few updates on what's going on with Chthonia and with just some of the other work that I've been doing, some of the things that might be of interest to people. And then I'm going to get into the thing that I was going to discuss today, which has to do with authenticity of voice. Now, anybody who watched last week's live stream will know that I talked a little bit about this, and maybe even the week before, when I think I mentioned what was going on with Senator Katie Britt and her response to the State of the Union address in the USA. This kind of goes beyond that. It's kind of about that, but not. It's more about voice and the way in which people use voice in both speech and sometimes in music as well, when it comes to emotion and inflection and how we have certain perceptions when it comes to voice. But let me start by giving you some Chthonia updates. So it's interesting. I was looking around on IG, and as I scroll through like everybody does, I found a post from Donna at Elements of Avebury, which is a really great store in the town of Avebury. There's two metaphysical stores in Avebury. There's Elements, and then there's the Hen Shop, and they're both great stores. So if you are in England and you go through there, that is and you're inclined and interested in that sort of thing, they're both definitely places to check out. But Donna had posted something today about solar flares, and she was talking about how a lot of people, and again, I realize that for some people this is controversial, but the idea that the solar flares might have to do with more headaches, more nausea, but for people who, in certain spiritual realms of thought, think this is a time for what they call downloads, these sort of additional bits of information that come in. And I thought about that, and I thought, maybe that explains why last week was the way it was, because it was. I think I had 2 major headaches last week. I have had a number of issues with nausea and with other things, and so just trying to negotiate and balance out certain things that are going on, and also not really sleeping very well either. I have not slept. Eventually I do fall asleep, but it's been rather difficult. I've had nights where I will go to bed at a reasonable hour, and then I will wake up at midnight, then at 1, then at 2. And it's always very, very uncomfortable. I feel like there's pains in my body, particularly pains in my left side. I've had issues with my right knee, and and they seem to be sort of acting up with that. Then the headaches will come back. And even though I'm trying a whole bunch of new ways to deal with that. And again, I know people frequently will have comments to try to tell me, oh, you should try this and try that. And I appreciate people being concerned, but I will also just save you the trouble, because I've tried a whole lot of different things, and it just seems like the problem persists in its own way. I don't know. I kind of hope it's going to be like a lot of problems that I've had over the years, that I go through that problem for maybe a certain period of time, and then I have a body change, and then that problem goes away. Of course, then it's usually replaced by a different problem. So, it's just a matter of what joyful thing would come next after that. But when it comes to downloads, certainly I have had, this has been an onrush of not only trying to complete previous work, but also a lot of new work that's coming in. So let me begin there. One of the things I've been working on is getting my books done. So I have a new book coming out at the beginning of May called Project Lethe. This is coming out of my own imprint, which is called Chthonia Books. I don't know how many people know about this. I have so many pieces to Chthonia that I find that the podcast gets the center of attention. And of course, indeed, my Instagram account is called Chthonia Podcast, mainly because there are other entities that call themselves Chthonia. Like there's a band that calls themselves Chthonia. And I feel like there's another group or organization that calls itself Chthonia as well. So to distinguish myself from them, I call myself Chthonia Podcast. because that was the main thing that this started at, was just a podcast. But I do have a publishing imprint, and I also have I have my related services at Transition Life Coaching, which I'll talk about separately too. And then I also have what's the third thing that I have there? Oh yeah, Scholars of the Borderland. I have so much I can't remember what I have. And it's really, I have to I usually end up focusing on one of those things at a time. But I've really done a major overhaul in recent days. So what I've done is I have so first of all, for the books, I finished one that I was working on over my winter break called Project Lethe. Okay, so Project Lethe has been completed, and the cover's been done, and it's actually in Ingram now for distribution. The release date is listed as May the 1st. I have also, if people visited the Chthonia.net webpage, which I am working on updating right now, you can actually, I do encourage you to check out Chthonia.net, because I do have some current blog posts about things that I'm doing, and lists of things like certain Patreon benefits and stuff, as well as the podcast feed, and links to pretty much everything. All of my books, all my services are all there. So it is worth checking out. But I do have, so I finished this one book, and I did the cover art for it, and I've created the cover. Creating covers in Ingram is a bear. I mean, I thought I had learned lessons from previous times, but somehow still no. It's like, no, we don't like your color profile. We don't like this. We don't like that. So it was a bit of a of a headache. But I've now also edited another book called Regenerator. Now, mind you, these are books that I finished over between December and January. And so now I am going through and doing the final edits, checking the spelling, making sure everything's consistent, names are consistent, plot lines are consistent, voice is consistent. Speaking of voice, that it's not jumping from third person to first person, just trying to keep everything consistent. Because sometimes I'll have started a story one way and then finished it changed gears, and then in the middle, and I'm like, wait, why are we going from I to he? It's like, so I'm cleaning up all that kind of stuff and making sure that the stories flow. I think Project Lethe turned out really well, and that's going to be the first one to come out. There's going to probably be one coming out one every month. So Project Lethe is going to come out in the beginning of May. Regenerator is going to come out at the beginning of June. And probably Queen of Hell is going to be coming out at the beginning of July. And then there's 2 or 3 more that I want to finish up. I have one called The Doll, and I have another one that is currently tentatively titled The Silver Queen. That might be the title it sticks with. I haven't 100% decided. But there's more elements to that story that I have to put together. So I'd like to finish those 2, and then I have an idea for yet another one. So this could be a very busy year for Chthonia books, where I have a lot of different stuff that is coming out, and that I will be putting them out and loading up to Ingram. The ebooks that I had a store on my Chthonia website where you could download a PDF version of my ebooks for Maeve and for Morrigan Timelines, which are the 2 that are already published of my novellas. I also have Archetype Possession published through Amazon. Truthfully, I think Amazon has a better platform for the actual book product, and for the fact that the Kindle format looks way better than the EPUB format. I've been trying to do things in EPUB. Now, I mean, the first errors, the hurdles that I had with EPUB, I've managed to overcome. But I find that even when I output it in EPUB and look at it through an e-reader app, it still seems like no matter what I do, like something gets messed up a little bit somewhere. And I finally just said, okay, I've gotten to a point where it's good enough, it's readable, people can figure it out, and hopefully they don't have those kinds of issues when they actually use it in their own reader. Especially if you have a page-at-a-time reader, I think it should look better than sometimes with the two-sided one. It's mostly okay, but there's some places. In any case, Maeve and Morrigan Timelines are now both available as EPUB through Ingram, and I'm going to be posting the links to those so that you can, I'm going to post them on the Chthonia.net website so that you can buy them directly from Ingram, get the ebooks for whatever your e-reader format is. And I don't know that they're promoting certain platforms. I have to see which ones that they deal with. So Yeah, so those books are going to be coming out this year, and Maven Morgan Timelines are now available officially as ebooks. So I will have that posted and available, and yeah, and those other books will be coming out. I have one coming out beginning of May, Project Lethe, Regenerators coming out in June. Just sort of reiterating here, Queen of Hell's coming out in the beginning of July, and then I'll have 2 or 3 others that will probably be coming out sometimes towards the fall. And speaking of books with the word Queen in it, I think Phantom Queen will be coming out later in the year as well. From what I understand, from what I heard from Theon, we're reading over the manuscript, or at least plan to, at the end of March. So I don't know quite where we are with that, but hopefully I'll have some news on that by April to find out what I'm doing, because right now everything I'm doing is sort of fiction, so I want to see what I'm going to end up doing in nonfiction. So yeah, so in any case, yeah, I've taken anything having to do with e-commerce down from the Chthonia.net website, and that also includes Scholars of the Borderland, okay? Scholars of the Borderland is my school that I have, and I think a lot of people don't know that it's there. In spite of the fact that I have done promotions, but like I'm saying, it's like I'm trying to promote, I have too many things going on, too many irons in the fire. So what I decided, I was paying for MemberPress. I hate MemberPress, okay? I mean, no offense to MemberPress people who work for them, but I just don't like the interface, and trying to sign on to it through WordPress is really cumbersome. And so I think a lot of people were frustrated trying to take courses or take lectures because it was like, oh, you need to create a password, I need to go in, now you need to do this, now you need to do this twice, and it was just really just so ridiculously cumbersome. And I also was looking over a lot of the lectures, and I'm like, these were all done. I feel like a lot of them are kind of shoddy. Not the content, but they need to be. I feel like they need to be done a little bit more professionally. So what I'm going to be doing instead is I'm going to be doing something called. I haven't decided yet, but I'm basically going to be doing some kind of an open university concept instead of Scholars of the Borderland. Whether it's going to maintain the same name or not, I don't know. But right now, the only thing at Scholars of the Borderland are mini courses, which are linked outside. They're linked in a third party elsewhere, and that's only for people who are on Patreon. Patreon subscribers are also getting a special podcast this week on Eros and Thanatos, okay? And that's love and death, or what Freud would have called the pleasure principle and the death drive. But it's not really so much, it's more of a mythological approach, and it suggests that Eros and Thanatos are actually the same thing. And so I talk about that, but that is for Patreon subscribers. So if that is if you're interested in more of the special podcasts like that, patreon.com/Chthonia. Anybody at the $5 tier and above per month gets access to the podcasts. There's some stuff available at the $1 level too, but like updates and early access and stuff like that. But everything else is at the $5 level and above. And I'm also thinking about doing a sort of live stream or Zoom discussion over there on that topic as well. That's a topic I've been kind of obsessed with lately, but I won't get into it here, but I am talking about it over there. I also have a new store for my merch. Again, I don't know how many people know I had a Cafe Press store for Chthonia merch. Cafe Press also, though, I felt it was really kind of expensive in how I mean, everything's expensive these days, but I wanted to get some better quality products. And I have another YouTube page that I follow where they have a spring.com store. And so I got some merch from there, and I really like the merch there. I like the quality of it. So I'm going to be using Spring now for the Chthonia store, and I'm going to be posting links to that as well. So yeah, I've been busy doing a lot of stuff and trying to get these things finished up. Yeah, I was trying to think what else. Yeah, new merch site. Okay, yeah. And yeah, just doing, like I said, just doing a lot of cleaning up, getting the websites done. I have to work on the Transition Life Coaching website as well, because I have a whole new idea for how I want to do the front. While it's a beautiful website that was designed for me by somebody in England, I just find working with the fonts and the way that the columns are put together is really it's starting to annoy me, actually, because I want to do something a bit different. I've actually thought about taking the whole thing down and going back to Wix or something like that, but then I was like, I will work with it. But I'm doing a lot of work over there, putting together certain things with my coaching practice that I'm going to be, I feel like that's constantly being tweaked, but that's going to be something that I'm working on as well, because I'm taking more of an approach of working as, I'm talking about being a spiritual coach, but really more as a psychopomp. because that's really that kind of work, working people through crises, transitions, underworld journeys, that kind of stuff. So that's going to be changed up over there as well. So yeah. Oh, and people who are interested in the Edward Gorey, the illustrator who died, I think, in the early 2000s. A lot of people are big Gorey fans, and I have a huge collection of Goreyana that I'm now putting up for sale. So I've been actually putting the catalog together of that stuff, because I have some stuff that's not worth a lot, but then I have some other things that are first editions, and I have a lot of things that are in pristine condition, signed items, stuff like that, and just some other oddities, odds and ends, calendars, cards, things like that. And I have at least one big poster, though somebody has to come to my house and get it. I can't, it probably would cost a ton to ship it, like 3 times the amount to ship it. So anyway, so that's all. Yeah, I've been working on all that stuff this week in the midst of not sleeping and all this other stuff that's going on. So yeah, so I mean, not bad in that sense, in the sense that I'm actually very, very productive and trying to just push a lot of stuff out. Okay, so that's the Chthonia update. That's first 15 minutes here, right? Chthonia update. And so now I want to get into the topic that I was going to speak about today, which has to do with authenticity of voice. And as I mentioned at the beginning here, we go back to a couple of these live streams. I had been talking about Senator Katie Britt's speech, which everybody seems to be talking about, at least in the USA. I don't know if people over in the UK are talking about this, but maybe it'll show up on Have I Got News for You when it comes back on again next week, I guess. But it was really, really appallingly awful, and I talked about that. And but I really wanted to go a little bit further into the topic of voice. And not just voice in terms of speech, but also in terms of musical voice, at least from the perspective of emotion. Because there were a number of things that came up this week. So, okay, so why don't I'll give the context for where this topic came from. So I was YouTubing it like a lot of people do, just kind of randomly running through things. And I came across a podcast called The Friendly Atheist. And the topic of this particular episode was called The Fundy Baby Voice. And it was with a woman called Jess Piper, who I think runs bluemissouri.org. She's tries to get, they're an organization in Missouri in largely red seats, which would be Republican seats, trying to get Democrats to run when usually they have nobody to run against them. So she works heavily with that organization. But she talks a bit about, she grew up in this Southern Baptist kind of environment. So what she does is she is talking about the Katie Britt speech and particularly about the voice that she used, which I did allude to in the previous episode. But she said a number of things about it that I thought were interesting. And okay, so the first thing that she talked about there was because the host had asked her, well, what if somebody speaks to you in that voice? What are they, what is the reason that people use that voice? Because it's that kind of high-pitched little baby kind of voice. It's that thing. You hear it a lot. I do hear it a lot in Midwestern women, almost naturally. But and I don't know that all of them necessarily come out of fundamentalist backgrounds or anything. And I don't know that all of them are necessarily doing it in an inauthentic kind of a way. But they are, I don't think it's affected, is what I'm trying to say. I think that's just how a lot of them speak. But I thought it really interesting. Like when I fly out to Ohio, or when I've been out in Iowa, or what was the last place I'd been out there? Out in Illinois, out by Chicago, and in where else have I been out that way? Haven't been to the Dakotas. Oh, I've been to Missouri. I've been down to St. Louis, and also down in Alabama as well. When I've been to all these places, yes, you do certainly have certain local accents that people have, but you also have a lot of women who use this kind of voice. Now, it's really the kind of voice that you would assume would be used for children. That it would be something where if you have, if you're talking to kindergartners, for instance, you're talking to little kids, you would be, you might talk to them, or the way you talk to a little baby in this kind of a voice. Because that higher pitch is something that kids respond to and relate to in a positive way. rather than people who talk to you in a monotone or something like this. You know what I mean? There's a certain expression in the voice that is meant to be soothing. It's meant to be non-threatening, and it is sort of, but it also has a tinge of submission to it as well. It's more of a childish and childlike voice, the kind of voice that you would expect somebody to use in an elementary classroom. Okay. And the thing is, you will have grown women using this voice not in that context. And the Katie Britt speech was one example of this, because she used that voice quite a lot. And when an adult woman uses that voice, it's literally uncanny. It's like the same kind of voice that I think I've said that female like AI robots use. When I've seen these supposed to be lifelike female robots, the voice that if they put a voice to them, the voice always is some version of that. It's unnatural. It's not a human voice. Okay, it's not a well. I guess it is a human voice, but it's not. It doesn't sound authentic. Again, in some people, they just talk like that. It may be part of, maybe connected to a Southern accent or to a Midwestern accent for some women. So again, I don't want to say that everybody who has that kind of higher pitched voice is somebody who is necessarily doing that. But you know when you hear it. And what Jess Piper had said was that, is that a lot of women it becomes unconscious. A lot of them use it automatically because it's the trauma of the religion that they were raised with, the way in which they were, told that they had to be, or the way in which, if they were in a male-dominated situation, using that kind of voice would be a way to not only convey themselves as non-threatening to the man, and they did come up at some point. They didn't really discuss it, but the host was kind of like, yeah, I wasn't really going to get into it, but you often wonder if there's a sexual component to that as well. Like, do they use that voice in the bedroom or what? You know what I mean? Like, you have to wonder about that kind of stuff with submission and so forth as well. And that topic they didn't really get into, but I can imagine certainly in a dominant submissive kind of situation where that might happen. But what she had said, what Jess Piper had said, and if you're just joining, welcome, and just to let you know that we're talking about authenticity of voice, and we're talking about this fundy baby voice based on this podcast that I saw with Jess Piper. And she had said that if she had somebody use this voice with her, this kind of voice that people have, when somebody used it with her. Like, she gave an example of picking up her son from school, and the teacher came out and used this voice with her and was just saying, well, now they asked some kind of question about what their mommy does or what mommy likes to, and she talked about how mommy was on the back porch smoking stogies. Okay. And the way that the teacher said it to her, she said, now when she says stogies, she's not talking about joints. She's talking about regular cigarettes. And she would smoke in the back when her kids were in bed. And she says, I didn't know my son knew I was outside smoking. But the way in which the teacher said it to her, she said it came across as very condescending. Like it was moral superiority. Like, oh, I have caught you in doing something that makes you morally inferior. Okay. So there is a very strong moralistic vibe to using this. There's a very holier than thou vibe when this voice is used in that context. There's a condescension to it. And this woman who had been a literature teacher for 16 years, she said, yeah, when I taught high school, she said, I had to be careful when I was talking to my students that I didn't slip into that voice, because it's like you're talking down to somebody. I mean, it's weird because it's a submissive voice, but it's also used to talk down to people, which I thought was really quite interesting. You're talking... How are you talking down to somebody with that? But the idea was that this was the woman who fits this Virgin Mary archetype that I like to talk about. The woman who's very pious and very chaste and very submissive to her husband. And so, of course, when she's talking to you, when she sees you doing something bad, she's going to talk to you in that kind of a voice. And if you were me in that same room, I would... I tend to have a... I don't hide my reaction to that voice very well. I mean, I try to, if I feel like it's being used with me in that context, which is very rare because you don't really hear people use that voice in New Jersey. Very occasionally. Actually, to be fair, I think my mother uses that voice now and again. My mother didn't grow up fundamentalist, but she, but I think that's one of the reasons I can't stand being on the phone with her. Oh, hi, how are you? Hang up the phone. Don't talk to me like that. I hate that. I hate being talked to because to me, when I hear somebody talk to me like that, I feel like you're talking to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And that's just it. It's offensive in the sense that it doesn't respect you as an adult. It's a child voice, and it's talking at you like you would be talking to a little child. And on the one hand, this is something that they do to show submission or to show non-threatening kind of behavior. And the other, it's this kind of moralistic talking down. I'm older and smarter than you kind of voice. That if it's used in any kind of serious context, if you are in a group situation and somebody singles you out and talks to you like that, it's like they're kind of showing you that they don't have respect for you. And that's the way I hear the voice. So when I hear people talk to me like that, I know I'm Taurus, I have a lot of strong Aries energy, and I'll be like, STFU, don't talk to me like that. Stop it, like now. I don't, if you're going to talk to me like that, like F off. Like I don't want to hear it. I don't even take it from my own mother. I wouldn't say those things to my mother, but I would say, I do get very short with her when she uses that voice with me because I don't like it. I don't like being talked to like like I haven't been toilet trained. I don't like to be talked to like that by anybody. It's just, and if I find that people don't show me that respect, I find it's a knee-jerk reaction. I'm just like, stop. It's just gross. Don't talk to me like that. But it's interesting that it's kind of used to convey a kind of sense of piety or morality. And maybe that's a piece of it that I find to be interesting as well. Because again, like a lot of moral posturing, it's very inauthentic. If you're sort of taking the attitude with people, if you're using that kind of voice to show judgment, like if you have, okay, I'll give you another example. If you go out with a group of people, and let's just say you have certain people who drink in that group, and maybe certain people who don't. Okay, this is just an example. And the people who like to drink be like, oh, I'm going to order a glass of wine, or I'm going to have this. And somebody sits there and goes, well, I'm just going to have this because I don't drink. There's that kind of moral pontificating, like I'm better than you because I'm not doing that. I'm better disciplined. I'm a healthier person. And by the way, I have heard people talk about their health in this way. And sometimes people just like to do it. Like if people have met some kind of a health goal, they might be like, oh my God, I did this and I did this. And they love to talk about it because they're excited about the fact they met their health goal. So it's not, so that aspect of it, I get it. I mean, I remember like when I would lose a bunch of weight, like all I would talk about is like, oh yeah, I did this and I worked out 10 times today and I did that. So I understand people do that. It's not that, but it's more when it's done in a tone of saying, I'm doing this because I'm a good person and you're a bad person. When it's couched in that way, because then it's meant to shame a person. Like, it's not a case of like I will go out with people who will say things like, oh God, my cholesterol is up. I better not. I'm just going to go with this. I can understand that too. But when it's used in kind of this very moralistic kind of a sense, that's another way in which I have seen people use that, or just talking to somebody like they're reprimanding them in some way. Now, did you do this thing? Did you do this? Did you do? It's not the way. It doesn't convey that you have two adults speaking to each other on the same level. It does certainly convey a certain amount of judgment with it. And anybody who is a grown-up is not gonna really respond very well to that. And the fact that there is an entire culture of speaking like this or this kind of speech is, it's interesting because, and a lot of times this is a speech that's coming out of trauma. Because one of the things that Jess Piper said here was that that a lot of times if you are dealing with male figures who you don't, maybe with respect to, do not have the same kind of rights. Like, these are often the groups, these fundy groups that will say, women are not allowed to go to university. Women are not smart enough to be educated beyond a certain point. You know, maybe you could be a Walmart cashier, but you can't be anything else. And I've known people like this. And what's weird and creepy about it, I remember years and years ago, I think I was still in high school, I knew somebody whose family had a fundamentalist flank, let's just say. And in that fundy flank, I used to spend a lot of time at this friend's house, and she had, they were coming to visit from wherever they were in the Pennsylvania, I forget where they were. But they had come out to visit, and they were, that's exactly the way they were. They were all the family where the wife is submissive and she stays at home and she's not allowed to be educated because women are not that smart. And they literally had this kind of way of thinking about things. They also, interestingly, had the way of thinking that, I remember them saying, you know, it doesn't matter if I murder someone, I've been saved by Jesus, so it's okay. This was another version of theology that they had. So you're looking at this kind of the moralistic thing. And it also got around to something that Jess also mentioned, is that there's a male version of this voice, and she called it preacher voice. Preacher voice. And you will get this with people, youth pastors and people like that, who have this particular kind of voice that, again, is meant to be very soft and non-threatening. And but again, in certain contexts, it actually becomes almost uncanny. Because let's do, like, the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, okay, in the U.S., I mean, what a lot of people say about him, if you read his background and beliefs and what he thinks this country should be and what it should, it's pretty freaking horrifying if you have any sense of sovereignty. It's pretty, especially as a woman, it's pretty horrifying. And his wife uses that voice, okay? His wife uses that voice when she's been interviewed. But he has a version of that too. And the way that it ends up coming across to people with men is they'll just be like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't like anything he stands for, but he is really nice. Like, it comes across as just nice. You're just somebody who's nice. You're friendly, you're laid back, you're approachable. But then some things that the voice actually says, I think of, okay, there was somebody who, there was an individual who was always characterized, somebody who we know in infamy, who was actually somebody who was always characterized as having that kind of very, very soft-spoken, kind of very innocent voice, and who everybody said, oh, what a nice guy, wouldn't hurt a flea, you know, it comes across in that way. And the person I'm thinking of who had that voice was Ed Gein. Okay, if you don't know who Ed Gein is, Ed Gein was the inspiration for both Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's something about that kind of voice. I mean, I know it's often a communication tool, again, to try to be non-threatening. But it comes across, there's something uncanny about it, because especially when the words coming out don't match the inflection of the voice, when the things that are being saying are very horrific. And like you could imagine somebody saying something about a woman who's assaulted, saying, well, you know, you got pregnant from that, and that's a gift from God. Like, you know, it's a horrific thing for somebody to say, and they're saying it in that voice. And so there's just literally something about it that doesn't often match up with, it almost feel like a folk horror thing. You know, there's just something about it that's not quite right. Okay, it doesn't quite fit in. So it's interesting that it has to be on that moral axis. But going back to the family, when we sat down at dinner, I remember that the man who was the head of the household in that fundy family happened to be sitting next to me. We were all, because it was a lot of us, we were sitting on a bench out on the porch, was sitting next to me, and he kept putting his hand on my thigh and rubbing my thigh. Okay, married guy with kids, standing here. Until I took my fork and started to go this way, because get your hands off of me. yeah, I mean, there can be a sliminess to it. And I know that's just my experience, but there's other versions of that. So I don't know. There's something about that voice, certainly when I hear it, but even other women, they recognize that this is a thing. But it's the kind of voice that you use to kind of convey innocence and purity. It's the way in which a vocalization is used to create a kind of persona that is either non-threatening, that's very feminine, but it's definitely feminine in a very patriarchal kind of a way. And it definitely gets back to this idea of women as being more infantile, okay, that they are the weaker sex, that they are the ones to be rescued and cared for. And you find women using this with other women as well. I mean, maybe with other people as well, but that is something that's an interesting phenomenon. And then where we're seeing a little bit more of that in some of these, spouses or even people who are senators, public figures. We're seeing people making use of this voice. Now, I don't know if there's I've not noticed a phenomenon like this, say, when I'm over in Britain or in Ireland or in other places like that. I haven't noticed that. So I don't know if it exists. I don't see it. Typically what I've run into in the UK is if I run into anything that's close to that, because the kind of evangelical fundy stuff that goes on in the United States is not, well, even if it exists over there, it's not at the same level that it is here in the USA. And so when I have run into people, I always know, because British culture tends to be polite and reserved. That tends to be the thing. That doesn't mean everybody. I know a lot of people who are just very friendly and very open. So it's not just that everybody, everybody has that restraint, but a lot of people do. So if I walk into a place where I remember the first time I was at Exeter, I was meeting with Nicholas Goodrich Clark at Exeter back in 2012. And I met with Dan Ogden to talk about possible PhD work and stuff like that. And when I was on the campus, I had somebody approach me and was very, very animated and friendly. And I thought, oh, this person belongs to one of these churches, and they're trying to get me to go. And sure enough, she says, oh, well, we do have a church. I was like, knew it. I know it, because I can tell that this is out of the norm for the way a person will approach you. I mean, it doesn't mean that people can't approach you and talk to you. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But it was just the way that she was doing it. I was like, And the reason you're doing it is because I'm somebody female walking around by myself. So you assume like, oh, here's somebody. And that's the kind of things that you'll see people will do with cults as well. They kind of try to gravitate and be very, very friendly towards the people who they think are on their own in some way. Maybe they're lonely. Maybe they're looking for something. It's a manipulation, okay? And that's the thing that I think, maybe that's just my association. Other people can tell me whether they think that's the case or not, but I see it as a manipulation a lot of the times. And it can be used in this way to convey, hi, I'm not threatening, you can come talk to me, you can come share with me. But there's also something about it that is meant to assert, in a weird way, it's both submissive and superior at the same time. It's morally superior, but submissive in terms of the idea that it's like the good Christian voice. I don't know how else to put it. Although it's not something I would have grown up with in my own experience of Christianity. I didn't deal with that. I grew up Catholic in New Jersey, and I didn't really notice that. But I do notice it in these much more conservative congregations in particular. Now, again, it's not to say that perhaps this kind of thing doesn't occur outside of that, but that seems to be the main context, and it seems demographically to be more Midwestern and South. Maybe Utah, maybe in the Mormon territory you would find this something like that as well, but I don't notice it as much, say even on the West Coast. It's an interesting kind of phenomenon. And and it's meant to be disarming in its own way. It's meant to be homey. It's meant to be homespun. Somebody who doesn't raise their voice, who doesn't get angry, who doesn't. But at the same time, I think you would find that if you pushed back on that voice, you would get a much sharper voice coming back out from that person. That can happen. Some of the other things from this podcast, which, by the way, those of you who have tuned in late, I'm commenting on a podcast by the Friendly Atheist on the idea of the fundy baby voice that has been used by women a lot. I mean, Katie Britt most recently, but there's other examples, like Mike Johnson's wife, and you will see it. The Duggars, they were showing, scenes from the which was it 13 children or 20 children and counting, however many friggin' kids they had. But she also used that voice a lot as well. And again, it's just meant to convey, something that's nice. And I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, to me, that's just a voice that you use to talk to children. Mr. Rogers actually has a voice like that. Fred Rogers had a voice like that. And everybody loves Mr. Rogers. Now, Mr. Rogers, to be fair, I think he was actually an authentic guy who cared about kids and everything. I don't think he was, but some people did find that voice to be creepy and unsettling, even though he's using a voice and a vocal inflection that is meant to be non-threatening to children. But in other contexts, maybe because there's a juxtaposition between what seems to be how the voice sounds and the intent of the voice, the juxtaposition is weird, and I feel like it really can. So it becomes uncanny in its own way. It doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound human. Now, by contrast, there's other speech patterns that women have. Women like me, okay, I'm going to use myself as an example, and I know other women like me, where we just speak in normal tone of voice, and I project, and I'm also very, very direct in my form of speech. Okay, and when you have directness of speech, now mind you, I'm not an unfriendly person in any way. I mean, I guess, well, unless somebody ticks me off or I can get nasty if I feel like I'm being bulldozed. But strictly speaking, that's not my way. I'm not the kind of person who, sometimes even if somebody's being a jerk, it's just like, whatever. I mean, I don't spend a lot of energy and time on it. But like I said, I do have this strong, like, Mars Aries thing. So I do sometimes come across that way. But I found, like, for instance, when I was like a department chair, and I would be at directors' meetings, vice presidents' meetings, provost meetings at the university, when certain things came up, especially with the higher ups, I'm not going to sit there and do this. I'm going to tell you, you hired me, I'm your expert, I'm telling you. Okay, I'm telling you what the situation is, what needs to be done. And if I feel like I'm being talked over, which a lot of women can relate to that phenomenon, where you go in a certain place and you'll start talking, and the man in the room, whoever they are, will start talking over you, and you turn around and go, yo, I'm not done talking yet. Excuse me. Let me finish. There's this tendency to do that. And that has been perceived, even by people, and not by people who are unfriendly to me or inimical to me in any way. They're like, well, you are too direct. What does that mean? What does that mean to be too direct? It means I'm telling you what I'm thinking. It means I'm speaking I'm speaking to you authentically. I can be diplomatic. I can search for the right words and not say things in a very harsh way. But if I'm in the middle of something that is ridiculously absurd, then I'm just going to say, excuse me, this is, no, this is absurd. Or even if I don't use that terminology, it'll be, we used to have, in the library I worked in, we used to have one director, and anybody watching this who used to work with me is going to know exactly who this person is. They don't work there anymore. But they would come in and they would use, actually thinking about it, they would use the baby voice. They come in and they go, well, in my experience, I think things should be done like this. And what they had to say was just like, there was no discussion. It was just, I feel I have the experience. And I'd turn around and I'd be like, no, we can't do it that way because of reasons 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's why this is stupid and why we shouldn't do it that way. I might not use the word stupid, but basically I conveyed to her, that's ridiculous. What's your justification? And it would just be, oh, well, I just think so. And this person did not like me because I was not having it. Because to me, and the other thing that does too, in kind of a work setting, is that you have people who will, who try to use that to, they will do things like this person, like literally would, they literally they close down entire sections of the library without, and cut off programs and things without telling people, without telling librarians in charge of stuff. And then when people would say, what the heck are you doing? Like, they would get mad, and they'd be like, oh, well, I'm sorry you feel like that. So you know what I mean? So it becomes a thing that when you raise your voice and you get angry about what's in front of you, it becomes a way of trying to say, well, I'm the adult in the room here, and you're throwing a tantrum. You're behaving like an infant. So you know what I mean? So that's a way of disenfranchising anybody who raises their voice to say, hey, I'm trying to be heard here. Okay? And a lot of times they do that. I often wonder if the reason I have a very loud projecting voice in a lot of ways, not always, but I think the reason that I do is because I grew up in that kind of environment where I would be talking and people would start talking over me or tell me to be quiet or tell me that and so my mother still does that to me to this day. Sometimes she's like, oh, well, you really should, in that tone of voice, you shouldn't really say anything. And I looked at her and I say, don't tell me what to say. And again, some people don't like that. They're like, oh, you don't need to be so harsh about it. Yes, I do, because you're not listening to me. And if I don't feel like you're listening to me, I'm going to make it clear that, you may still ignore me in the end. I mean, that's your choice. But if I'm trying to tell you something, I always feel that at the very least, just listen. Just listen. Otherwise, if you try to talk back to me in that kind of a manner, I feel like you're just disrespecting me. You're disrespecting to me, you're condescending, and you're treating me like I'm a child. And that's the way I interpret that. And that's just it. Like that's only the joke I always had about my mom too. It was just kind of like, okay, it doesn't matter that I've said this before, like how many post-grad degrees I have, how many places I've been in the world, how many books I published, and I'm still talked to like I'm 5 years old. Like I think a lot of women who watch this would probably get that. It's just not a thing. But I mean, I suppose again that there's men who will go through that as well. But I think. I don't want to say that people who use that voice are always using it inauthentically, or I don't know if I want to use the word inappropriately, but there are certain contexts where that voice may be appropriate, where a non-threatening voice, a calm voice might be appropriate. But when it turns into, and maybe when you're talking to little children, a lot of times you do kind of try to vocalize on their level, especially when you're dealing with really young children. But when you start vocalizing that way to other people, I mean, and again, I don't think it's always intended this way by people, but it is, because it could be just a cultural habit, but it does come across as talking down. And by contrast, women who have voices where they speak up, they speak honestly, and maybe a little bit more directly, maybe a little bit of what we might consider a masculine way, okay, as opposed to a feminine way in terms of vocal inflection. If you look at linguistic studies of female voices, which I do talk about in the intro to my To Death and the Maiden, where the voice that is more deferential, that pulls back, that says, well, I don't know, what do you think? And I do that kind of stuff too. A lot of times I'll do that with people. I'll be like, I don't know, what do you, but when I deal with indecision, though, when I see people who are indecisive, I'm just like, look, okay, you're not going to make a decision here. I'm making it. That's the decision. You can play that game forever. But that's something, but the kind of thing that I have found that people have often said to me that they consider that offensive, because the fact that I will speak directly to you and tell you exactly what I think, and not necessarily to say anything mean or negative, I'm just directly telling you what I think, and I'm not using that deferential voice, that's perceived as aggressive. And like I said, 95% of the time it is not meant in an aggressive way. But people perceive that as aggressive, like by contrast. And so it's interesting to me in the way in which approved feminine vocalizations, even for men, they become almost a way of trying, I mean, yes, in certain circumstances, they may be about calming somebody down, but they tend to also sometimes be used as, in almost a weirdly manipulative kind of way. And as I pointed out earlier, this is the kind of voice that you often, I mean, I mentioned Ed Gein, but I mean, this is a voice that you often you'll hear a lot of the times, not all the time, but a lot of the times on certain serial killers, you'll hear this voice too. It's that very quiet, very, as they called it, preacher voice. And And it's so I find that depending on the other context, if I have somebody who's using that voice, but I feel like I can tell and hear that we're having an authentic conversation, that really doesn't bother me. But when I feel like I'm getting one set of content and a voice is telling me something else, then that's when I'm kind of like, okay, something is off here. Something is not right. And that's the things I think that people had picked up on in that speech in particular, because it literally just came across as a very phony and very melodramatic kind of a presentation. And it does come across as false in kind of a moralistic and condescending way. Now, the last piece of what I wanted to mention here had to do, and this was something that came in later in the week. What was it? One of the guys, Eric Carmen, he had, if you were around in the 80s, you would have, or if you saw Dirty Dancing or whatever, the movie, you would have heard, Eric Carmen had a couple of songs that were very popular. I think it was Hungry Eyes from Dirty Dancing. And, pardon me. And then there was also, I think the song that everybody seems to know is All By Myself. Okay. Now, that's a song that for me falls into a category of song. I just, because I think, because the discussion that I was listening to was about how this song was authentically full of emotion. And I mentioned to the person afterwards who made this particular video about this, I just said, I said, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on authenticity, emotional authenticity in music. Because, well, on the one hand, you have the certain modern technologies in music, like pitch correction and auto-tune and things like that, that actually make everything sound like a piano. A440. Everything. It takes the emotion out of singing. So when somebody sings in a certain way, it's sort of snapping it to a perfect line. So you really lose the emotion. Okay, which is problematic. But then on the other hand, you'll have certain vocalizations, and some people absolutely love this kind of stuff. Okay, people who love like what Eric Carmen did, or Dan Hill, or who's the guys from Air Supply. I mean, that kind of voice, that male voice that is very, very dramatic, and and so we say, well, that's, and I think he was saying, well, it was very authentically full of emotion. Well, in the sense that, yeah, nobody had taken any kind of technological software and like fixed it to make it sound like everybody else. Yeah, in that sense, it's authentic. But I've often felt like I just that's another area, and I don't know how other people feel about this, but I just often feel that songs like that actually just make me cringe and make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, for the same reasons that I'm talking about with these other kinds of voices. Because there's just something very inauthentic about it to me. I hear this, especially, there's a book that I had bought years ago. I always liked Dave Barry, who's an American comedian from Florida. And I don't know, I feel like Dave is probably long since retired, but he had something that came out in 1992 called Dave Barry's Book of Bad Songs. And he characterized songs like that one as the "you don't love me anymore, so I'm going to jump into the bathtub with an electrical appliance" version of songs. So it was, and that's what I think it is to me. But again, and this is what I was saying to this person, was I said, I feel like there's a lack of authenticity there. At least lyrically, at least in terms of content. It's like the songs you hear, like women, if you hear the songs that'll be like, oh, I know I cheated on you with 10,000 other people, but you're really the one, and now I'm just so sad that we can't get together. And you're just like, what? Like if somebody came to you in real life and actually talked to you that way, I'd just be like, go away. It just, because it's an emotional manipulation. It's like, oh, I'm with you. Oh, well, never mind. Now I'm with this other person. Oh, wait, no, never mind. Now I'm back with you. It's like, yeah, it's almost, that's kind of a thing. And so when I hear this guy talking about, like, if you listen to the lyrics of that song about, like, I used to go around, I didn't care about being committed, but now I'm all by myself. And I'm like, well, go out and meet somebody. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you sitting around victimizing yourself over this? Like, that's what I hear there. I don't feel sorry for him. He sounds like he's whinging. He sounds whiny. I don't know. And if you think about that kind of a thing with children as well, Like you have little children who, when children, like when you tell them no, and then they start with that voice, and they start whining, you're just like, oh my god, like that's my reaction to that. So to me, that's not. I don't know. I don't see that as an authentic emotional expression, and I think I liken it to what I was just talking about, in the sense that I feel like it can be used in a way that's meant to be manipulative, or that's meant to play on somebody's emotions in a way that, I don't know, I just find it cringeworthy. Because, and I said, I think about all of the kind of soft rock I grew up with in the 80s, and then I just kind of thought, it's probably no surprise that I got into punk rock, because to me, that was just very raw and very expressive. In terms of how it felt. What wasn't always technically good from a musical standpoint, but I just, to me, it's just say it. Just say things to me directly. Like, don't, all of this other stuff just sounds like somebody's trying to sell a bill of goods. That's just how I feel about it. I don't know, and I don't know how other people feel about that thing. But yeah, I think I find myself thinking about those things, those kinds of vocalizations along the same line. But just to sort of wrap up a little bit on the idea of this fundy baby voice that this podcast was talking about, it was interesting. I'm just sort of looking at the notes I had taken on that episode as I was just listening to it while I was doing something else, and then I found myself writing stuff down. And it's, and it was, she was talking about how this was a place where women would get up in a church, and they would, if they got pregnant out of wedlock, and they would have to apologize to the congregation for their pregnancy. Now, mind you, the men were never made to stand up and do this. So my response to that would be, I'd be like, oh, well, where's he? And if he doesn't exist, then maybe this is a virgin birth, and I don't know, maybe you shouldn't be apologizing to her. Maybe you should be bringing her, like, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know. I mean, just saying. But I just, but there's this, it's just interesting how there's certain vocalizations that when women use them, they can be used, again, certain contexts, they're fine, but when they kind of get used in this context that is, where the words don't necessarily match the vocal pattern in terms of what's being said. If they're being used to shame somebody, to condescend to somebody, to talk to somebody like they are, to show somebody that you don't respect them or don't take them seriously or think that you are morally superior to them, then it becomes a whole different thing. You're using something that's meant to be aimed at children as a way of infantilizing adults to a certain degree. And it's a very feminine thing. Feminine, I put in quotation marks there. And whereas when a man uses that voice, it's also meant to be calming, friendly, and approachable in one sense. Like I said, it's like the youth pastor voice too. I've seen that, examples of that. In fact, I'm just going to mention this. If any of you have ever seen, you can find it on YouTube. It's a really, really, really bad film called Rock, It's Your Decision. I came across this a long time ago. I ended up with a DVD of it. And I remember watching this just being like, what the heck? It was actually, I found out the background of this particular film was that it was a screenplay written by somebody at Liberty University. Now, if you are from, if you're from the States, you've probably heard of Liberty University, and you know that it is an evangelical Christian college. Okay, so this girl wrote this screenplay, and clearly this was a girl who'd never listened to rock music, because it was literally basically about the evils of rock music, okay? So, and I always find films like that to be absolutely hilarious. So I was watching this one, but I noticed that the voices in there as well, the youth Pastor Owen, the youth pastor, and even the way the mother spoke, the way the son spoke, Jeff, who was the main character, they all spoke in that kind of voice or in that baby voice. And they all spoke that with that same vocalization. But the two characters who really weren't like that, who were kind of like thinking that all of this was kind of stupid, what were their names? There was Marty, and then I forget the girl's name. She was Jeff's girlfriend or whatever. But they were the only two who didn't use those vocalizations, and they were sort of portrayed as the bad kids in some way, as the ones who were not, allowing themselves to be exposed to the evils of rock music and not embracing the message of Christ, or whatever the point of that movie was. It's bizarre. It actually gets to be a little bit offensive at the end too, in terms of the things that are being said. But it's interesting because I said, yeah, you can, if you pay attention in things like that, you can hear those vocalizations being used, and sometimes they're being aimed at children. But there's also times that they're being aimed at adults too. And I don't know. I feel like there's a subtext there that says that that I don't know, that it's trying to create a sense of innocence, but it's not an innocence in the sense of, I don't know. I think to a certain degree, we lose our innocence as we get older. We become more cynical. We become more jaded. We get to know more stuff. And if you think about the actual archetypes of the crone or the older wise woman, okay? The crone woman is somebody, one of the reason she ends up getting kind of a witchy association is because she's a wise woman. She knows stuff. This is a voice that says, I don't know anything, okay? It's a voice that says, I don't know anything. And also when they talk to you like that, they're implying, or they're talking to you as if an implication of you don't know anything. Or that somehow, if you want to look at it in some of those more fundamentalist terms, it's the, oh, I'm going to pray for you. I'm a good person, but clearly you're sinful and you need help, so I'm going to pray for you. It's a talking down. But it's couched in those kinds of terms because that is supposed to be sort of the acceptable femininity. Whereas a female who speaks with a very authentic voice is viewed as being too aggressive, too challenging, too direct, and, too liberal, too educated. I don't know, whatever adjectives people want to throw at it. But it's considered to be, I've noticed this, even among people who do not embrace any kind of extreme religious viewpoint, there is kind of a subtext in the culture that suggests that is considered to be too aggressive. It's too aggressive, and that's not the nice way that ladies behave. And of course, to me, I'm like, well, then that's the way I'm going to behave, because I'm not, I have my own values and my own morals or whatever about things, and actually, I think they're probably pretty common sense compared to most people. But as far as what my role and what my place is, go away. I'm not the kind of person who you can very easily, who's going to be particularly, when I hear those kinds of manipulations, that's immediately the way I interpret them, and that's how I respond to them. Not necessarily in a nasty way, but certainly in a very direct of, nope, let's set the boundary right here, because that's not the playing field that I'm operating on. And if that's the way you insist on talking to me, okay, but I'm probably not going, I'm going to go somewhere else, because, or I'm not, at this point, I've stopped taking seriously what you're saying, because I feel like you're either not listening to me, or you're doing something in a way that is trying to convey that there's something I'm doing that somehow isn't right. I don't know. I hope that makes sense to people here, but yeah, I have, so yeah, this whole idea of fundy baby voice, preacher voice, the non-threatening voice that can be used in a threatening way, and I think, or in a way that's meant to judge or that's meant to shame, and maybe used when somebody wants to try to convey the fact that they believe they're certainly in these communities, that they believe that they're morally superior to you, and frequently, yeah, I don't particularly, I don't know. I find it to be uncanny. I find it to be unsettling, and again, it's just very hard. I always feel that respect is one of those things you have to earn. Okay, I mean, my general default behavior with people is I generally assume everybody is worthy of respect. But if I feel like I'm being disrespected, I don't feel obliged to be like, well, I'm going to take the moral high ground. I'm just like, no, let's get into it. Or maybe I won't get into it. Maybe I'll just be like, yeah, whatever, I have better things to do. That's usually my thing. I'm like, yeah, I have better things to do than get involved in this. But anyway, be curious to know what people think. It's a really... it's interesting, though, because to me that is a linguistic thing that is certainly in the culture in the United States. And we kind of saw it really flagrantly on display when we were looking at Katie Britt's speech, and then when we see it in these other women who talk in this kind of babyish voice. But I think, and again, for the latecomers here, I've just kind of pointed out that I also would refer to that as serial killer voice too, because I just feel like there's just something about it. Okay, the way Carl Jung would say, as I've said about solar mythologies and stuff like that, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. So the more you're trying to convey to me an image of goodness and piety, the more I'm concerned about what's behind that image. Okay? Because there's something back there that just seems rotten. It feels like a mask. It feels like it's something that's not authentic when used in certain contexts. And I think people can feel. I mean, if you have any sense of things, you can feel when somebody's talking to you that way in a friendly, authentic manner, and they just happen to have that kind of voice. Or they grew up in a culture in the Midwest or something, and they have that kind of a vocal inflection. But I think you also know when it's the other. And yeah, I just find it very, very interesting, especially when we're talking about themes of the dark feminine, because the dark feminine is about sovereignty, and if you're sovereign, then you're authentic, okay? Or if at least you're striving for sovereignty, you're going to speak in an authentic way, or you want your voice to be heard in an authentic way. You don't want people saying to you, no, don't say anything, don't do this. You don't want to be talked to like you're either a farm animal or a child that needs to be fenced in. We talk to our pets in those voices, right? I mean, that it's not. It may be perceived as non-threatening, and again, in certain childhood educational contexts, maybe it makes sense. But I think almost any other context, it's just creepy. It's just creepy, and and in worst cases, it's offensive. So anyway, that's my thought for today. I'm going to probably go because now I'm 7 minutes after 1. I try to keep these to an hour. But I want to thank you guys for joining me. It was really nice to see, a few people, small audience, but generally I think a lot of people see this in the follow-up as well. This will be in my profile, and as I've said, if you want to go back and watch the whole thing, what I find is you have to, when it comes up in your posts, you just hit it once, and then it opens up in Reels, and then you'll actually hear the whole thing. And posts, somehow it cuts it off after like 2 or 3 minutes or something like that. So... yeah, and also it will be on YouTube, this particular live stream. I will download it and put it on YouTube tomorrow. And new podcast coming out next week. And as I said, doing special Patreon podcasts on Eros and Thanatos. I talked about that in the beginning. Love and death and why they're actually the same, in at least mythological terms. So that's something I'm doing on Patreon. People at the $5 level and above at Patreon get that benefit. So... of extra podcasts. So if that's something that interests you and you're not on Patreon, something to think about if you would like. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and wait till next time.